Hello, everybody. This is Ron Presley here, editor of Catfish Now magazine, and I've got Joy Pounders here with me in the studio today. Welcome to our B&M Tip of the Month segment, Joy.
Thanks for having me.
Glad to have you here. And I know you're kind of a catfish fanatic. Where do you, or a flathead fanatic, really? And that's kind of the topic. Where do you normally fish?
Uh, Mainly the Tombigbee River here around my area. It runs for 100 miles north, 100 miles south of us, and dumps into Mobile eventually. And then the Black Warrior, I've been on there a few times. The Coosa, Tennessee River, just anywhere around that Alabama, Mississippi State line, in that area it's all good flathead fishing.
And I do know you had a state record flathead there at one time.
Right, got lucky enough to get it out of our river. That's
out of your river.
Very lucky.
What was the weight of that fish?
77.
77 pounds.
Matt Bingham got me by 7 ounces. So
is that the new one?
Yeah.
Oh man,
77.7.
Yeah.
So he's got me.
Those are big old flatheads, aren't they?
Yeah, you had. I mean, it's don't get me wrong. I mean, it's certainly skill in there, but it's a lot of luck too, because those guys, when they get on the hook, they really have their way with you for a while.
Yeah.
And you're hoping they don't get in trees and rocks and stuff, which happens often. And we hear about those stories, and I promise you they're true when you hear about them from people that they just took it down and couldn't turn them. That's the way it really is.
That's the way it is, yeah. Well, I know that you're also particular about how you set up on some of those fish. Could you tell us a little bit about how you go about that?
Yeah, we was talking earlier, and something that we always talk about is hook setup, if you're elevating your bait and what kind of poles are you using and everything else. But one thing that I don't think is stressed enough is the approach. How are you coming into these areas? 75% of the spots that I fish for flatheads, especially this time of year, I'm pulling up to the bank. And if you're pulling up to the bank, generally speaking, I don't want to be more than 60 or 70 feet away from the structure I'm fishing. That way I can have a good chance of pulling this fish out of whatever cover he's in and not have to worry about the angle being too much and then having too much of, leverage on it. So, one thing that I like to do as far as the approach, and I really stress it, is turn that outboard engine off. If that means get your trolling motor out and come into the bank, that's fine. If you can use the current to help you get in there, that's fine too, the wind and things like that. But what I've learned was to take my old shad net ropes, which are about 20 to 25 foot long, and put a 5-pound weight on it. And I can take those weights and I can throw them in a tree on the bank, or I can throw it on some rocks in the bank, and I can pull my boat closer, and I can use that same thing to wedge that boat in there and to pull it tight. And I usually have about 4 of them on there, and I use 2 to 3 of them in each spot. So it's just something to really get up there stealth-like and just pull up and, grab it and pull as hard as you can into the bank, because that's key, is keeping that boat still as possible as well. So that's a big deal for me, is that approach. So, the second thing I would say is having some loppers. As crazy as that sounds, and I know everybody will make fun of me, just like they make fun of the nuts and bolts and stuff like that, having some loppers or a machete on the boat, because sometimes it may be convenient to pull down the bank 50 feet to where it's clear out, but the hole may be right up under a tree and some limbs and everything else. If you have those loppers, you can pull your boat right up under there, get up under there, lop some of those twigs off, throw them on the bank, don't throw them in the water because they're going to get on your line. And, you could have just as much free range if you take some of those. Don't cut the whole tree down. We're just talking about a few limbs. You can have as much free range as you want to if you have that on your boat. It's really been a big deal for me, for the last few years doing that. And then the last thing is brush grippers. I don't know if you've ever seen them. They got real sharp teeth on them. You just open them up, you put them on a limb, and they got a string. You pull them, and you can't really, take them off unless you broke the string. So, those 3 things right there is something that I really can't stress enough. I mean, we all know kind of how to go after these fish, but really the approach, being as stealth-like as possible, and just being as quiet as possible, doing everything you can to keep the sound down. Like I said before, and I'll tell everybody, if you're underwater and you're swimming in the river, you hear a boat coming down the water, you think he's right on top of you. You pop your head up, he's 3 miles away. What does that fish think when that outboard is right over his head? It's got to be loud. So just be, you know, as stealth-like as possible.
Yeah. Well, there you go, folks. Don't overlook that initial setup. And that's your B&M tip of the month.